Well, good morning again. Let me welcome you to Lafayette Community Church. My name is Jeff Michaels, and we've been on a series for the last couple of weeks that I've entitled f.i.g.h.t. F.i.g.h.t. It's the 5 principles of handling conflict, handling any kind of conflict you might face. And it's coming from the Bible, infused with a little bit of personal experience that we share, infused with a book that I've been reading that says it's called Crucial Conversations, based on 25 years of research in handling conflict in real life situations. And as I read the book, I realized that all the stuff in the book was said in the Bible 2,000 years earlier. So I figured, even though I've learned some stuff from the book, let's go back to the Bible and find out what the Bible has to say about it all. So 5 principles of handling conflict. And the first 2 we've covered in the last 2 weeks. We're just going to review them for a little bit. If you have the note sheet that's in your bulletin, you can pull that out and take some notes as we go along. But the first week, the principle was F, and it was figure it out. Basically what that meant is, before you enter into any kind of active conflict, you need to take some time to actually do some thinking. Actually figure out what's going on, what's the cause behind it, what's the real situation. Because quite often we get into conflict from a small situation, a small issue, and we stay in conflict because of the way we handled the earlier times of the conflict. And we begin to be fighting each other more about the fight than about the original issue in the first place. So we always need to figure it out, means get back to the root. Get back to figure out what's really going on. And the phrase I encourage you to take as a commitment for that week was, before I fight, I'll do some figuring first. The F principle. The I principle came last week. And in fact, it's the second piece of this figure it out, because ultimately, figuring out the conflict begins with figuring me out. Figuring out what's going on inside of me on an emotional level, on an intellectual level, everything that's going on with me. And so the I principle we learned last week was inspect yourself. Inspect yourself. And the commitment I asked you to make was, I'll deal with me before I deal with you. I'll deal with me before I deal with you. And there are 3 specific questions. If you didn't hear last week's message, it's already on the internet. You can watch it or listen to it that way. But the 3 specific questions I asked you to focus on last week were simply these. Number 1, the question was, what have I really done in the situation? What have I done so far that's been wrong or unhelpful? Then secondly, what do I really, really want moving forward? What do I really want for the situation? What do I want for me? What do I want for you? What do I want for us moving forward? And then finally, what are the stories I'm telling myself in my head that are affecting this relationship? Because we identified that all of our emotions basically come down to a story that we tell ourselves about a situation or about another person. And that fuels the emotion we feel towards that situation or that other person. So that's inspect yourself. That's F, and that's I. And so today we come to the G principle. And as we get started, we're not going to actually get to the principle until the end of this morning, because I feel like I need to set it all up for us. And it begins with this realization that there's a moment in every conflict when all the grace just leaves your body. You know what I'm talking about? We use different phrases for this conflict moment. All the grace just oozes right on out of you, spills on the ground, and you're left with no grace. It's that moment that we use different terms for. One of the terms is, he pushed my buttons. One of the terms is, I've had it up to here. Another one is, I've had all I can take. If you don't shut up, I'm going to explode all over you. It's the feeling that I've reached my limit, and we phrase it that way. And you know, as a matter of fact, it seems like all of us hit that at different places. And so when you go to counseling, as many of us have at some point in our lives for various relational problems or something, when you go to counseling, one of the things they try to tell you is to understand where your limit is, to set that boundary, to communicate clearly with the other person. I'm about at my limit. Can we take a break? Then you go to your separate places and you do the F and you do the I, and then you come back and you get back into it until you've reached your limit again. And you say, I'm sorry, I've just you're pushing all my buttons. You just know how to get to me. And we all then make a choice. And the choice is simply this. It's your first note you might want to jot down. We all, in that moment of conflict, choose either silence or violence. We choose either silence or violence. Either we choose, I'm just going to shut up because the next word out of my mouth is just going to hurt you. Or we say, I'm just going to say the next word out of my mouth because it's going to hurt you. We move to either silence or violence. And all of us have been there. You've been on both sides of this equation. There have been moments when you opened your mouth and you felt like that was the wrong thing to do. There were moments when you kept your mouth shut and you felt like that was the wrong thing to do. There were moments when you were very proud of yourself, that you said exactly the most violent thing at the moment you could possibly say. And then the next day you thought, ooh, that might not have been smart. I still want to pay attention to this person now and then. So here's the deal. We all come to that place, and it's because we've been trained. From our earliest days, we've been trained this very same thing. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. In other words, there are only two options. Keep your mouth shut or get rid of all of the malice you feel. And since we sometimes feel the malice, we feel like we have to keep our mouths shut. You were sitting at your grandmother's table. You were 5 years old. And your grandmother brings to the table her world-famous, church potluck award-winning, and family recipe creamed spinach. And she says to you, the 5-year-old child, I have the most wonderful spinach. You don't like anybody's spinach, but you're gonna like mine. And she serves it to you, and the plate is full, and you're not going to eat anything else until you eat her creamed spinach. And you take a bite of it, and you're 5 years old, and she then says, with grandmotherly eyes in her face, and your mom is nudging you with her elbow, she says, how do you like it, Billy? And you say, what? Say, Grandma, I love it. No, when you were 5, you said the wrong thing. When you were 5, you said, Grandma, this stinks. I hate this. And she starts crying. And your mom takes you out to the bathroom. And she says, what are you saying? She worked all afternoon on that. You tell her you like it. And then you come back, Grandma, it was very good. Thank you for making it for me. You're older now, and your wife has bought a dress. And in 15 minutes, you need to leave the house for the wedding. And she says to you, after putting it on for the first time, honey, does this dress make my butt look big? And after years of training, you know what not to say. But you also know you have to say something fast. Because if you're silent for too long, that's just as bad as saying, yes, honey, it does. Immediately, you say, no, of course not. That's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen on you. I'm glad you paid so much money for it. It's because we've been trained to think that there are only two options, silence or violence. And silence doesn't just mean clamming up. It means withholding some of the information that's relevant to the relationship. Silence means there's some pieces of me I'm not going to let you see. Because if you see those pieces of me, it might be violent. And violence says there's some pieces of me that aren't really true, but I just have to get it out because you need a slapping. And here's our problem. We face the dilemma. Well, I'm telling you today that I'm firmly convinced that it's all a lie. I'm convinced you have no buttons. I'm convinced you're never pushed into a corner. I'm convinced you never reach your limit. I'm convinced that all the times you thought you were there, you simply ended too soon. I'm convinced there's a power available to us, there is a strength available to us that takes us beyond that moment where we make the choice. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In the book that I've referenced before, the Crucial Conversations book, after 25 years of scientific study and research, these guys make this claim. They say, however, there is always the possibility of being 100% honest and also 100% respectful. After 25 years of research, they've determined that there is always the possibility to be both completely honest, to get everything in you out on the table, and also to be completely respectful, and to be able to do it in a way that shows the other person that you value them, you care about them, and you want them to do the same for you and get their stuff out on the table too. You know, the Bible 2,000 years earlier said this very same thing. The principle is called speaking the truth in love. And it's in Ephesians chapter 4. So we're going to take a look at that. If you have a Bible that we passed out, it's on page 815. I'd love it if you'd turn there with me. In Ephesians chapter 4, we're going to be looking at these verses and walking through them and talking about them as we go through them. But it begins in verse 1, Ephesians 4:1. Paul is writing and he says this, "As a prisoner for the Lord then," and he's a prisoner, he's actually in jail, and that means he's a prisoner, so that means he's trying to urge the people with all of the gusto and vigor he can offer to them. He says, I'm a prisoner, and I'm a prisoner for the Lord, and so I'm going to offer you everything because I feel it's so important. I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. Now, what does that mean? First of all, what's the calling they've received? Everything in the book of Ephesians, from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 3, is the summary of what Paul is talking about, their calling. And you can look in chapter 1 and you can find how God is trying to build a family. And then you can look through the rest of the chapters, you can see chapter 2, God is talking about the grace that he's offering to us. And in chapter 3, Paul comes to the summary statement of the first 3 chapters. We find it in verse 14. And as we get there, I want you to look for words that are used more than once. Because there are 2 big words that show up over and over in this section, and they're very important for what Paul is going to say in chapter 4. So flip back just a little bit, Ephesians 3:14. Paul says this, "For this reason," that means this is the summary of everything I've just talked about. Everything I've just talked about comes to a head right now. So you're getting all of 1 through 3 right here at the end of 3. "For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name." There's no understanding of Father unless it's from the Father, the Heavenly Father. Paul says, I pray to him, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all